Hello and welcome back to this Dabfullistic Crusade. This video will be a review of the beautiful Criterion Spine number 736 Blu-ray release of It Happened One Night, the 1934 landmark screwball comedy masterpiece directed by Frank Capra and written by Robert Riskin. This was the film that really put both of them and, of course, their studio, Columbia Pictures, and its boss, Harry Cohn, on the map and got Columbia out of Poverty Row. It also made Clark Gable a sensation overnight, something that had been building up over time, but this was really the film and the role that crystallized his star image forever. It also worked wonders for Claudette Colbert, who has probably never been as attractive and as lively on screen. The pair of them, really. You saw flashes of it before this, but Capra really had a knack for getting the best and most human performances out of actors, the most natural, the most non-affected. And the fact that this was supposed to be a punishment film for Clark Gable, going over to Columbia, making this cheapy film when he made the bosses of MGM mad at him, it turned out to be the exact opposite. So this was a film that no one really had that much of expectations going into. It was originally titled Night Bus due to the fact that the characters meet on an actual night bus to New York. But it's got an earthiness and a grittiness that makes it, a prime film of the Depression, and that's why it was so successful with Depression era audiences. You got a slice of the higher life by seeing the idle rich characters, and you also got the sense of reality with the everyday characters, and it was a blending of the two sides of life in the 1930s that I think makes this film extra special and why it resonated so greatly with Depression era audiences. As a film, it was building off the success that Riskin and Capra had just had the previous year with Lady for a Day, which did get some Oscar nominations and was the first of their partnership films that really struck a chord with audiences. They had started working together sometime before. It was on the film Platinum Blonde in 1931. That started life as a Jean Harlow vehicle, and it was also supposed to be a Loretta Young vehicle, but that was written by Joe Swerling, and then Robert Riskin came in and did additional dialogue, and all of a sudden you get a sense of the Capra film to come. It's not quite there, but you see little pieces of it, and you will recognize, if you're a fan of the more famous Capra films, in Platinum Blonde, there are some things they try out for the first time, particularly the famous scene in Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, where Mr. Longfellow Deeds finds there's an echo in the great mansion hall and has all the servants do yells to get echoes. Well, the actual first dry run of that is in Platinum Blonde. And it's a great film that unfortunately very few people have seen, and it's not on Blu-ray yet. But then the next year, they worked together for the first time fully. So the film was written by Robert Riskin instead of getting a dialogue credit. And for me, I think it's the first true masterpiece of the Capra canon, and that is 1932's American Madness, which has finally gotten a Blu-ray from Sony, but it's one of their sort of tossed off efforts, and it's not really much better than the DVD, which is here in the collection box set. But that is the film that I think you first get the true sense of what people think of as the Capra film. And the reason why I mention Robert Riskin is he often gets overlooked, which wasn't helped by Capra's self-mythologizing, particularly in actually throughout his entire career. He did notably always try and take credit for most things. And then his autobiography, while entertaining, is not necessarily the most factual thing in the world. And unfortunately, a lot of that stuff carries over into a lot of the various extras and critical pieces. Not everybody has read through a lot of other supporting documents, or essentially what you have to do is you have to read Joseph McBride's Catastrophe of Success biography of Frank Capra, which is the first work to really get behind the mythology. And the writers were key to Capra's success, but most of all, Robert Riskin, who basically was the one who had all of the ideals represented in the Capra films that people associate with Frank Capra himself. And it was this partnership between Riskin and Capra in the 1930s that really established the both of them. And their continued success helped to establish Columbia Pictures as something that was not just a Poverty Row studio. So it was the sort of elevating of the craft with each film, and each film becoming a little bit more successful, being a little bit more daring, or trying different things. So American Madness was decently received, but it wasn't a smash hit or anything. It's a very underrated film, and it's one of the Capra titles that is the most unknown. And when you do see it, you will recognize many things because, of course, it deals with a bank, and there's a run on the bank, and the president of the bank is in a moral crisis. So you see it, and you can't help but think of a lot of things in This Wonderful Life and other Capra films as well. But I think that's where everything starts to crystallize. And then you move into Lady for a Day in 1933, where it is much more of an emotional story and about the human characters. And there's a sort of evolution going on. But then that film was much more successful, and again did get Oscar nominations and helped to start really put Columbia on the map. It's safe to say that really it was the Capra films that were actually doing that almost single-handedly. So they were getting more free reign from Harry Cohn to get more money for budgets and get a little bit more wiggle room. And Capra was one of the few who would stand up to Harry Cohn and demand extra money and extra time and demand things, and a lot of times actually get it because he was getting results, primarily due to this partnership with Robert Riskin writing the screenplays and helping to develop the films. But so Lady for the Day was, again, much more successful, got a great critical response, got a great audience response, and got Oscar nominations. So all that leads into 1934 when you get to It Happened One Night, which of course was the first film to sweep all the top Oscars. So this was a film that came out of nowhere and essentially took the public's heart by storm, took critics by storm, and then swept the Oscars. And none of this was intentional. It's one of those lightning in a bottle moments where everything was developed in the same way as the previous films, but there's a certain sparkle here and such a believability to the relationship that develops. It's not something that is right there. Of course, every person in the audience can see it in their eyes when they first meet. They have to of course have the classic meet cute where they can't stand each other, as in any screwball comedy. Something that Ernst Lubitsch really elevated to an art form, the art form of the meet cute, which it happened one night, has one of the great ones. But it's all about the journey. The screwball comedy is about the journey of two people getting together. It's through trials, tribulations, sometimes blunt force, but it's all about the journey. And of course, the original title of the film was To Be Night Bus, but what's magical about It Happened One Night, what makes it so special and so different, and what I think is the quality that resonates so much with people, even to this day. This is a film that has not aged one iota. It's, again, as I mentioned before, you get both sides of things. You get the sort of idle, rich, societal comedy that people were used to and liked to see in the Depression era, to see the sort of world they didn't have in everyday life, and blending that with the more everyday common man types and all the various character actors that Capra loved to pepper his films with. And he has sort of stock company of famous faces that you'll recognize over and over and over again. A lot of famous character actors and a lot of lesser known character actors that you will recognize from other Capra films because they're just peppered in, and he would reuse them over and over and over, just like everybody from John Ford to even Sergio Leone. So this was something that directors really used to do a lot more often, use people they really trusted and believed in and knew what they would get performance-wise. But I think in addition to that, what really makes It Happen One Night so special is there's a wit to it, of course, but there's also a certain sense of the poetic because the human emotions are allowed to come to the surface. So in a lot of ways, I think this film perfectly blends the more humanistic side of Lady for a Day, which is a film all about emotions and the human condition of these various characters of different walks of life. And it blends that with some of the energy of American Madness, some of the rat-a-tat dialogue, the realistic characters, that down-to-earth style. So it's bringing together things they had been working on. So I think it's a beautiful melding of really the three films they had already worked on together: Platinum Blonde, American Madness, and Lady for a Day. And it's very easy to analyze this film. There's so many things to find to love in it, even if you start the film thinking that, just like Clark Gable's character does, that the Claudette Colbert character is literally a spoiled brat who just runs off simply because she can't get her way. But as the film develops, it quickly becomes apparent that she is not what she appears to be, and she is doing all of this because she's never been allowed to have a life of her own. And this is where the initial bond starts to form between the lead pair, and we quickly get on their side. We quickly get behind this idea of, yes, these two need to get together. They complement each other so beautifully, but of course they start out not being able to stand each other. And there are beautiful moments in the iconic set pieces that everybody remembers after you've seen the film once, twice, 5, 10 times. It's never enough times to see this film. But when you look at those moments closely, you can start to recognize how they start to inherently develop emotions for each other and develop this attachment. You can see the relationship start to begin and spark, and it's all inherent to the scenes. It's all emotional. And of course, deep down, they start to realize this, but they don't want to admit it. And then in various points when the cards are laid down, things don't always go according to plan, which is, of course, is the best part of any screwball comedy. But what I think is great about It Happened One Night and what makes it special is something that Robert Riskin was very good at doing, and that is in every script he wrote, trying to get some poetic sense into the characters and into the story that he was telling. And there are, again, frequent moments in the film that, the jokes suddenly stop, the gags stop, and everything is allowed to be laid bare. And they're really eloquent moments, and they're moments you don't quite expect, because that's not something you get in most screwball comedies. So I can't help but think of moments like, say, for example, in The Awful Truth, particularly towards the end, when it's all about reconciliation and buried emotions and things people don't want to admit, and things literally stop, and those things finally come to the surface. So there's a real emotional core in this film that I think everybody who sees it picks up on. And of course, it helps that it's absolutely hysterical and perfectly paced, executed. Again, I think Frank Capra is quite possibly the greatest actor's director who ever lived, in addition to being a brilliant technician and really having a sense of pacing, and right down to the actual pacing of the dialogue. He famously would get actors to speak a bit more quickly because he knew that in projection, when you actually viewed the footage, it actually ran slower than how you were capturing it in real life. And so there's always a vitality in Capra films to all the performances, even in the lesser known or lesser regarded films, or the films that aren't quite as good. There's always a vitality there. And that's just something that I think is inherent to Capra's direction and his style. And you can just see all these performances he gets out of actors, right down to even the smallest of bit players. He would come up with bits of business for people to do and help them develop backstories. And these are just extras in the background of a big crowd scene. There aren't as many big crowd scenes in It Happened One Night, say, as in American Madness with the bank run, but that level of detail is still there. And again, I think it's really interesting when you look at the films in sequence and their chronological order. You can really see this developing style, and you can see how Capra's direction and Riskin's writing is really starting to gel. And by It Happened One Night, it was, full on synergy. And it's just unfortunate that Capra felt the need for some reason to continually try and grab credit, which is eventually what drove the two of them apart. And eventually he started working with other writers. But it did result in this film, which is possibly the most iconic film they made together. This is the film that still gets discussed probably Well, one of the films that gets discussed the most in the whole Capra canon, and of course, it helps the fact that it swept the Oscars, winning all the top prizes, and it is without a doubt this single film that solidified, of course, Capra's name, Gable's name, Colbert's name, and it was this film that fully put Columbia Pictures on the map as a major studio. Before this, they had had a couple hits, and they had the first couple Capra pictures that were getting, a bit more successful, but they were still viewed as a Poverty Row studio. It was a major thing for Lady for a Day to get Oscar nominations. They didn't win, but it was a major thing still to actually get nominated. But this film sweeping the Oscars and then getting an extended release where more people got to see it put Columbia Pictures on the map forever. This is the film that got them out of Poverty Row, and that cannot be stressed enough how important that was. And of course, this is the films that the success of this film led Capra to basically start to be able to not quite write his own check, but pretty much get darn near close to that. So it was because of this film that his dream project started to get greenlit. So that because of this film's success, we would get things like Lost Horizon. And in the preparation of that, to even get to that, Capra wound up having to make another film, which of course turned into Mr. Deeds Goes to Town. So this is the film that fully started the run of absolute Capra directed masterpieces, most of which were still written by Robert Riskin. So this film's importance cannot be overstated. It's still a timeless, beautiful film. If you have never seen this, this is one of those films you need to see 5 or 10 times because it becomes an old, cherished part of yourself. It just gets so much into your brain, into your heart, into your soul. It has not dated at all, and it is the film that made Clark Gable an icon forever. It is quite possibly it's definitely my favorite performance of his. It's quite possibly his best performance. It's wonderfully natural, and you can see a lot of the elements that were in some of the earlier films he did, such as Manhattan Melodrama, where he's got charisma for days, but it's not quite the Clark Gable fully formalized you think of yet. Everything's there, but you're not always you're brought in by that charisma, and he's a charming devil, and he's phenomenally interesting. But it's not really until it happened one night that he becomes a real person on the screen, that he's fully three-dimensional, and he's a really likable guy, but he's also, not going to compromise his own principles, which really makes you love him all the more. And of course, his introduction in this film is one of the classic introductions of any character, and perfectly sets up his not compromising his morals, even if it's simply to not let on that he's been fired by his newspaper editor while on another bender. So it's a beautiful film. I can't say anything about it that hasn't already been said incredibly well by other critics, but this is just one of the timeless gems of not just comedies, not just screwball comedies, but of cinema in general. It is one of the great masterworks of the medium. So, of course, it was great news that Sony was going to do a new 4K restoration, which is what is on the Criterion Blu-ray. Sony has done a really great job over the years of continually going back and trying to improve their restorations on the Capra titles. They do realize that they are pretty much the most iconic films in the entire history of Columbia Pictures. They are basically the films that built Columbia as a studio. So it's very wonderful that they keep going back and working on them. Unfortunately, not all of the Capra films have been released on Blu-ray. Some have been restored in 4K, but have no disc releases. They have had some theatrical screenings in the past few years, but I keep hoping for maybe a box set, or maybe licensing out to a boutique label like Criterion, or maybe Indicator, who does a lot of Sony titles. I keep hoping that we get a box set of other titles like Platinum Blonde and American Madness, and there's so many great other films, or Bitter Tea of General Yen, for example. Some of those do have passable Blu-rays, but they really deserve special editions. So it was great that It Happened One Night got the 4K treatment, because this is a massive improvement over their last effort, which was on the 2006 DVD I have here on the box set behind me. Now, It Happened One Night has gotten a number of video releases, the primary ones being the recipients of various restorations. So if you go back to the 1994 Laserdisc I have here, that is based off of a photochemical restoration, and the elements for this film, because it was very popular and it was from the 1930s, it was not preserved in the best of means, which is unfortunately how most of the Capra films are. They were very popular, and their success really harmed their elements. So the Laserdisc is pretty good for the time, and the audio is okay. Then the first DVDs were pretty much working off that photochemical work again, and depending on the film, they're a bit of a mixed bag, but they're as good as they could be at the time. Then in 2006, for the reissues and this box set, Sony used digital tools for the first time, to varying results. They were technically better than the older releases, but some of the audio was a bit overscrubbed. And for some reason, It Happened One Night on the 2006 digital restoration, it's a really dark transfer. It's far darker and almost sort of not washed out, but it does, unfortunately, it's too dark. And so it was something I noticed from the first time I watched that particular DVD version. So while it was cleaner and more fully restored than the Laserdisc and the older DVD, it did have issues. It was not perfect, and again, I do think it was a bit too dark. So it was incredible to look at the new 4K restoration, which just vaults ahead in terms of picture quality. And of course, we now have so many greater tools at our disposal to work with damaged negative or damaged sources, or we don't have the same limitations, shall we say, as we did 10 years ago, or especially in the photochemical realm. So you're able to pull out an image that is far beyond what you would have seen before. And of course, I think the greatest example of that in the Capra lineup is, of course, Lost Horizon, with its multiple restorations, and of course, the usage of 16 millimeter footage to fill in some of the gaps of where the cuts were made. And the Blu-ray of that is absolutely amazing. So Criterion has presented this in their usual type design. I do appreciate the image they used. They didn't go for a sort of arty rendering. They've done a very nice black and white still from the iconic Walls of Jericho sequence in the first sort of motel bungalow they find themselves in. And then the black and white design carries over onto the rear, which looks quite nice. And I like the font used for the title, which carries over onto the back as well. The interior looks really nice. I like how they kept the starry background on the disc label, which matches all the original poster art, and goes wonderfully with the interior art, which is from their when they wind up sleeping in hay after they're having to go on foot through the country. So the booklet is a fold-out affair. So when you fold it out, the info and the casting credits are on the front and back, and then the actual essay is printed sort of newspaper style, like this. This essay is by the critic Farron Smith Neame, who's done a number of Criterion releases and commentaries for other labels. And it's a really great essay that goes into some of the stuff I mentioned before about how no one really had too much to say about this film. It was offered to many various stars who turned it down because they didn't think it, sounded very good. And Riskin and Capra wanted to go on to something bigger after A Lady for a Day, and basically everybody kind of wound up doing this, and not quite under protest, but also somewhat under protest. And again, it's sort of one of those magical lightning in a bottle moments where everything went wrong. Nobody really wanted to make this. Nobody thought it was really going to be worth much. And it just became absolute magic that transformed all of their careers. But what's also great is this is the one essay, or one extra, I should say, that really goes into more of the realistic side of things, and Neem does credit and talk about some of the things in McBride's works on Capra. So out of all of the extras on this release, I think the most balanced and accurate in terms of getting into the nitty-gritty of what really happened and getting past the sort of self-mythologizing that Capra did throughout his career is actually Farron Smith Neem's essay in here. So it's a really great essay that I highly recommend, and it's all the better because, again, it's getting away from the sort of idea everybody has of Frank Capra, which unfortunately is not quite true. To put it politely. So about the transfer notes, I'll read those really quickly. The new transfer was created in 4K on a Scanity film scanner from a 35mm safety composite fine grain made from the original nitrate negative, and also a 35mm nitrate print. The digital restoration was performed by the Prasad Group in Chennai, India. Again, this film has never looked this good on home video. It looks stunning, and it's perfectly balanced, so you can basically, get rid of your old 2006 DVD, which was way too dark. It's beautiful work, and I don't think anybody could have done any better, considering they're not directly working from original negative. They have the best sources around, but they're still compromised, and they're having to mix and match. So they're already using a generation away with the safety fine-grained nitrate source, and then they're also patching in with another 35mm nitrate print. So they're having to mix and match between two sources. They're not working from original negative. So with all that considered, this is an unbelievably gorgeous disc, and again, the best the film has ever looked on any release to date. Then about the audio, the original monaural soundtrack was remastered at 24-bit from the original nitrate optical soundtrack and a 35mm nitrate print. The soundtrack was restored by Sony with additional restoration by the Criterion Collection. Clicks, thumps, hiss, hum, and crackle were manually removed using Pro Tools HD, Audio Cube's integrated workstation, and Isotope RX3. So that's pretty typical of what you're going to read in a Criterion booklet if they did extra work themselves. Now, Sony released this film on Blu-ray in other countries. I don't have that, but I have read other people's opinions, and of course, our friends at the Blu-ray blog have compared it to the Criterion release. So I'm only able to compare this to what I have on hand, which is the 2006 DVD and the 1994 Laserdisc. Now, it does seem like everything has been using the same sources, and unfortunately for a lot of the Capra films, the best thing Sony has is almost always an optical track. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is the same way. They're working from an optical track source. So they're not working from an audio negative, unfortunately. But with all that being said, everything relatively sounds similar across all three releases, but it is sort of a mixed bag. Different attempts have been made over the years to do audio cleanup on these sources. The Laserdisc, unfortunately, it seems like it's got some like a general sort of noise gate going on. Parts of it sound really good, parts of it sound not so good, and obviously because it was before digital audio restoration and digital audio tools were far more prevalent and far more detailed, it's sort of more of a very patchy effort. It sort of is what it is. So unfortunately, it doesn't sound great. The 2006 DVD sounds okay, but not very good either. And so this new version that Sony did, that Criterion has done their own work to, sounds better than both of these to a significant degree. However, I will say that the Blu-ray blog has said that they prefer the Sony track on the foreign region B Blu-rays, that it seems like it's better because it doesn't have the additional work. Again, I don't have that particular release to compare to. I would really like to try it out because, again, I do think this does sound better than the older releases I have here, because you can definitely tell the restorative efforts that have been improvements, but there are times where when Criterion does extra work, it's maybe a little bit too much here and there. And when you compare it to if you can find the source audio, like say on this Sony release that's not here in the US, it is definitely possible that the original Sony audio that they produced before the additional steps were taken to, say, further clean it up is actually preferable. So Again, I don't have that particular release, so I can't say for sure. But since Blu-ray reported on it, I have great faith in their detective skills, so I don't doubt them on it. So I definitely need to try and get a copy of that because I'd be very curious to compare for myself. But outside of that, I do think this does sound better than the previous releases. Now, I haven't gone all the way back to the earliest videotape releases. That's pretty much the only U.S. Releases that I haven't covered for this particular film. But I will do that at some point when I can stumble across a decent condition tape, just out of curiosity, because I've found more and more you really do have to check every release of a film that exists, because you never know when there's too much noise reduction or too much cleanup applied to a film. And sometimes it's not just old Laserdiscs that sound better. It's not just digital PCM on Laserdiscs that sound better. Sometimes it's the analog tracks that sound better. And then sometimes you have to go all the way back to the earliest releases or back to, say, a VHS tape release, particularly a tape with hi-fi audio, because sometimes those are from cleaner sources or sources that no longer exist, or they just haven't been subjected to as much noise reduction. So there are some cases where the very oldest releases can actually sound better than a modern restoration. It just all depends, and you don't know until you start digging around. So those would be the two versions that I still need to check. I need to try and find some of the earliest releases and look at some of those. And I do really want to find or get a copy of that Sony foreign import Blu-ray, because it's very possible, like Blu-ray has reported, that the Sony source restoration audio did not need the further cleanup applied. But again, I do want to stress that, if you're just coming to this film, the audio is better than the previous major home video releases, and it wipes the floor, especially with the old Way Too Dark DVD. Now, to move on to discussing the extras, I'll go over these very briefly. So, to lead off the extras, there's another of these wonderful critic pieces that Criterion has started doing more and more often, where they get two or sometimes three critics in a room, and they basically just have an open discussion about the film and its various elements, its production, its influence, its legacy, their own feelings on it. And it's really nice because it's a very straightforward but warm and open, very human conversation, not just the more academic talking head bit that we're so primarily used to. So I do really appreciate these. It's between Molly Haskell and Philip Lopate, who have been on a variety of different things. And of course, pretty much everybody will recognize Molly Haskell from her many appearances in documentaries and featurettes, and of course, all her printed works. But it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. It definitely, it's one of those things you don't even realize how long it is. It's pretty lengthy. You just get sucked into the conversation. So it's one of like all of these, you could listen to it for probably a couple hours. Unfortunately, they don't get into a lot of the nitty gritty stuff that Joseph McBride wrote about, and that Farron Smith-Neame talks about in her booklet essay. So it is, again, a bit more of a general conversation, and they talk not just about Capra and Riskin and It Happened One Night and Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert, but they also touch on other screwball comedy classics, and say, for example, 20th Century and other things, and The Awful Truth as well. So again, it's an open discussion, and if you've seen one of these Criterion critical discussion form extras, you'll know what this is like. But it's a wonderful discussion you just wish could keep going. So you're essentially getting this in place of a commentary, because unfortunately there isn't one, which is kind of a shame, because of course I love commentaries, and you would think for It Happened One Night that we would have a great commentary, but unfortunately there isn't one. And that's honestly the truth with a lot of Capra films on disc. They don't necessarily have the most extensive extras. This is one of the more stuffed ones because it's a Criterion release, and they especially don't have a lot of extras that get beyond the self-mythologizing, which unfortunately we get some classic bits of that in the rest of the extras. So to move on, we get carryover, the Frank Capra Jr. interview that was done for the original 1999 DVD release was carried over on the Sony DVD. That's carried over. It's a little short interview. He did interview pieces for most of the DVD releases. He did a few commentaries as well, and then he did some more pieces specifically for this 2006 box set. So they kind of sort of basically say some of the same things that are repeated everywhere else. A lot of the anecdotes, and it's nice getting the direct connection because it is the director's son, literally talking about his dad. But unfortunately, again, it's repeating a lot of the self-mythologizing that Capra frequently did. So you do have to sort of take it for what it is. Then we get the Frank Capra's American Dream 1997 documentary that's narrated by Ron Howard. That was also included on the DVD box set. And again, that is pretty much an entire documentary of Capra's self-mythologizing. So basically, the best thing you get out of that is all the talking head interviews they get from various writers, directors, actors, actresses. It's great getting their perspectives, and it is a decent overview of Capra's history. So you do get his general biographic information, his childhood as an immigrant and things like that. So it will give you a general idea of everything, but it does sort of keep painting him in the greatest light, and like he did everything, and it does kind of shortchange everybody else a little bit. It's better than most things, but you really do have to read Joseph McBride's book to get the complete picture, because if you just watch this documentary, which I did several times over the years, it doesn't give you the full complete picture. It's a decent overview, but since there's so much other information that doesn't routinely get covered about Capra's career, it's not the one-all documentary on Capra. So it's great that is carried over. So again, you can fully retire your old DVDs. Then there's also the AFI 1982 Lifetime Achievement Award tribute to Capra. And it's great getting these specials on disc, but of course they are the edited for TV broadcast version. We've never gotten the full uncut dinners, and they were shot on videotape, so the quality is limited. It's great seeing those because you get to see so many famous faces, and it's like a time capsule, and you're seeing them all these years later in the early 1980s. And it's sort of like when you see the Golden Globes and everybody's at the various tables, and obviously it's a plate dinner, so everybody's all next to each other and interacting. But again, it's sort of, if you have ever seen one of these specials, that they are very much, everything was great and everything is great, and isn't it great that we're doing this Lifetime Achievement Award? And even though most of the times it was for people who couldn't get a picture made because no one would pay for the financial backing. But it's great that Capra was getting the accolades that he deserved, but also, again, it was all the based on the self mythologizing that he did. So when you know all this and then you go and you watch this thing again, makes it a little hard to watch here and there. But again, you watch them for the time capsule sort of aspect, and the fact that you get to see all these people paying tribute to Capra, and all these years later, and recounting their experiences on the films, even though it is almost entirely scripted and things like that. So it's great as a time capsule piece, essentially. So it is great when we get these on disc, because the AFI has not released them officially outside of a number of them were released on Laserdisc back in the day. And again, we've never gotten the full things. We've always gotten the edited down for TV broadcast version. And then last but not least is what I think is without a doubt the most important extra on this disc. And to be honest, if you're a Capra fan, or you like studying these films and studying the works of Frank Capra, this is entirely worth the purchase of the disc alone. I mean, you're going to buy it anyway because it's happened one night. But if you're just looking at what is on this disc, the fact that this is on here is worth the entire purchase price. And that is a brand new transfer of the 1921 silent short film Folta Fisher's Boarding House. This was the first film that Frank Capra ever directed, and he sort of, blustered his way into getting the job. So it's, of course, unbelievably rare to have a legendary director's very first effort actually exist and survive, particularly a 1921 short silent film. So it's amazing at all that it actually survived. But while it is very straightforward and very simple, and a lot of people who don't study silent films may not get the most out of it, it is really rewarding looking at it very closely, because you start reading in all these things that you start recognizing elements that he would, polish and better himself on, but ideas that he had and techniques that he would use. It's not, obviously not quite there, because it's the first thing he ever did, and he wasn't really a director when he did this in 1921. But you can't help but read in things to seeing this short silent film that it's sort of like the first inklings of what the Frank Capra style would be. There's some little flourishes here and there, so it is not just a typical short silent subject for a first time director where they're just going to point the camera at something and it's very basic and it feels very long even though it's a short. There is some energy to it. Again, it is very simple, but it's just amazing that we're actually able to see Frank Capra's very first directorial effort, and it's been restored, and it has a new score, which is quite nice. That's credited to Donald Sozin. And again, I'd seen this before, but in very terrible quality, so it was really fantastic to see it this way, fully restored. It's got some tinting, and again, it's just incredible that Capra's very first directorial effort survives and has been restored and included on this disc. So it's a treasure for people like myself who are total nerds on Capra's career. So again, that is the best extra. It is the signature extra of this release. And if you are a Capra fan at all and you have not gotten the Criterion It Happened One Night Blu-ray yet, please go and get it just for Falta Fisher's Boarding House. And I know it's a kind of silly title to say, but I just can't believe that it exists, and I'm so happy it was restored and included on this release. So again, I think it's the most important extra on here, and if it had been the only extra, I would have been happy, because it is that important. So I'm so pleased it was restored and included on this release. So Criterion's Spine number 734 is, I think, one of their essential Blu-ray titles, even though I will have to check out that Sony Blu-ray, the European one, to see if that audio is indeed better, which apparently it probably is, again, according to the report on the Blu-ray blog. So while this is better sounding than previous releases, it still does seem like it could sound better, like maybe some of the cleanup was maybe a little bit too overzealous here and there. So that's really, I think, the only drawback. That, and of course I would have liked to have seen an audio commentary, but these could all be addressed, and hopefully so, when there is a 4K UHD release, because Sony has been, working away at bringing catalog titles to UHD, and all the main Sony Blu-ray releases and the Criterion It Happened One Night have been from those 4K workflows. So there is, some room for improvement, and this could still be a beautiful UHD with perhaps even better audio than what's on here. But the extras package is pretty good, and it ports over all the relevant information from the DVDs, so you can pass on your DVDs. You don't have to hang on to them, which is always great. But again, the new critical pieces are really nice. The conversation is great. And Farron Smith-Neam's essay is really good and gets more into the nitty-gritty about the production details, which are very rewarding and really help to explain the magic of this film. But also, again, I have to say that the inclusion of Capra's first directorial effort, fully restored, is just, again, it's something that you just wouldn't think you'd ever get to see. And I should also mention, before I forget, it does include the film's trailer, but it is, I believe it is a reissue trailer, because it talks about winning the Oscars. But it does include the surviving trailer as well. So again, you don't have to hang on to any of your old releases, unless you're like me and you do that anyway, because you have problems. But with all that said, Criterion Spine 736 Blu-ray release of It Happened One Night is one of their essential purchase titles, even though the audio could be a little bit better, simply because it is one of the essential films. So this is one of the films that has to be in everybody's library. It's a title that everybody has to experience time and time again. It becomes a cherished favorite very quickly, as do all the main Capra films. And it's the perfect lightning in a bottle moment where the Capra-Riskin partnership just came to full fruition, and this is without a doubt the first of the truly iconic defining films of the Frank Capra filmography. So, from this point forward, we move into the territory of it's just each one is like a classic and they fall like dominoes. So it's like you go from It Happened One Night, then you go to Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, Lost Horizon, You Can't Take It With You, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. It's a run that's almost unprecedented in terms of unbelievable success across the board in every aspect of motion picture making. So that really begins after the crystallizing elements of It Happened One Night. Everything comes together on this picture. It is one of the immortal films. I cannot stress that enough. So if you haven't gotten this already, please do yourself a favor and get the Criterion Blu-ray based off of Sony's 4K restoration, which is a distinct improvement over the past major releases. And again, I wish it did have more extras, but it is a pretty well stuffed supplemental features package. And I do think that this film deserves a UHD without question. And let's hope that maybe the audio is a little bit better, or just that plain Sony restoration track without the additional work done, because apparently that is better than what's on here. But again, this is an essential release. This is a title that everybody needs to have on their shelf. It's just one of the immortal films. So that's it for this review. Please leave any comments you have below. And as always, keep your disc spinning, keep physical media alive. And thanks for watching.